Hello and welcome. My name is Rob Simons, and I am the Chicago Violin Competition's Judge Chair and the former Principal Second Violinist of the Rochester Philharmonic. And I'm thrilled to be joined today by Logan Chiang, the Laureate from the Senior Artist Division in 2024. Welcome, Logan.
Thank you for having me.
So first of all, Logan, tell us about where you are and where you're based now and what you're up to.
Well, now I'm based in New York City. I am currently doing my doctorate degree in violin performance and concert composition at New York University. I have been here for a while. I've done my bachelor's and my master's here in New York City, and I do plan to continue being here for the foreseeable future. Yeah.
Well, that's really interesting. So tell us a bit about NYU, a renowned institution with a very broad intellectual life. How is that maybe a little bit different than the normal conservatory, and how has it influenced you?
For me, when I started here at NYU, during my bachelor's, I wasn't even a music student. I originally had applied as a neuroscience major. And someone from the music department heard me playing in one of the trial lessons that I had with the faculty, and they offered me to audition for Steinhardt, the music department, and so I did. I ended up doing a double major in neuroscience and violent performance, which I later realized is what a lot of students do there. That is one of the main selling points of a music education at NYU because they offer you a second major in sometimes a completely unrelated discipline. I know kids who are fantastic at the violin, but they also major in math. They major in linguistics. It's such a wonder to be able to get your to get a worthy education like that. Um, but as far as I'm concerned, I think it's only helped me. I don't know about other people. I can't speak for other people, but some perspectives that I've gained from doing research in science, those mindsets have helped guide my practice and also how I perform on stage. So it's all interconnected in terms of a mentality thing.
Can you
Yeah.
say more about how it's influenced your practice and your performance?
Well, when I was doing research as an undergraduate in preparation for my thesis, I had to do a lot of work on my own. I had to do a lot of searching, very methodical searching. And in practice, sometimes I get very frustrated because I try to resolve one thing throughout the day, and then when it doesn't work, I just keep going at it because I think that if I try hard enough, it's going to work. But then you realize a brute force approach is ultimately very harmful in the end. It not only wastes your time, it also breaks your spirit. So having that a methodical approach and research gives me the insight as to uh, it gives me the insight on how to analyze my problems and how to resolve them in a logical way and not base my response on what I am feeling in the moment. Sometimes I really want to practice this passage for 10 more minutes, but I know that if I do, I won't have time for anything else. And it's a simple concept, but sometimes it's very hard to convince yourself that it's the right answer.
Does that is another way of saying that by taking this logical and an analytical view, you're also taking a longer term view of your development
Of
instead of
course.
forcing it. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And speaking about time for anything else, what about life in New York City, in the sort of one of the richest cultural environments anywhere in the world? How has that influenced you as a composer or as a violinist?
Well, if I'm really to be honest, for the first I think 2 to 3 years in a foreign environment, I didn't grow up in the States. I grew up in Taiwan, so for the first 2 to 3 years, I was really too intimidated to go anywhere, to venture anywhere outside of my own home or outside of campus. But after attending the first few concerts at Carnegie Hall, I remember in I think my senior year, that really helped me change my perspective on what was actually out there, or what kind of musicians am I actually surrounded by in this wonderful, wonderful city. Um, it really motivated me to try to do more with myself and try to reach out to the colleagues that I really admired, and be they cellists or violists, or nowadays I work with a very close composition student. He's fantastic at writing music, and just surrounding myself with all these people has just changed the way I used to play, which was very just the way I used to play was a very monotone, I would
Hmm.
say. It was not um, I was not suited to play different kinds of repertoire, but I've got more exposure to that along the years.
I want to go in two different directions at the same time, so help me out here, Logan. I want to ask you about your concert composition, but also based on what you just said, I also want to ask you about your choice of repertoire and also think about this more expansive way of playing. So you chose the Korngold Concerto, and again, what a beautiful performance you gave of that piece, and I was so impressed by your warmth. But now I want to know a little bit more about why you chose that repertoire, if that's indicative of anything, and how does that intersect with your composition?
So Korngold was a very it was a very odd choice for me. It was one of the most intentional curveballs that I've decided to throw in my entire life, because the reason why I learned this piece was for the NYU concerto competition. Now, some schools they give out one concerto and everybody has to learn that one, but at NYU, and I believe at some other schools too, you're allowed to choose your own repertoire as long as it's a standard concerto from the repertoire. And I remember that one semester, everybody was playing Brahms concerto,
Hmm.
literally everybody, and I got so tired of hearing it in the practice halls, and I decided, well, what's a concerto that will not only be technically satisfying for me, but will also surprise people? And I came across a recording of Heifetz playing Korngold in a lesson with my teacher. He showed me the recording of Heifetz, and I'm like, that's it. That's what I'm learning. So, with not a lot of time to spare, I had to get to work very quickly. And so, just given that time pressure, I really internalized a lot of the things that Heifetz had to say through that recording. And although I can't claim to have done it as well as he did, nowhere near, but it's really guided a lot of the musical decisions that I've made in that concerto.
That's a legendary recording.
Yes.
Speaking of influences, you chose to play some Vinyasa on this competition too, and I always like to think that maybe you disagree with this, but when you perform a lot of showpieces, you're in dialogue with other violinists as much as you are with the composer. So maybe with the Brahms Concerto, Korngold Concerto, you were in reverence of these master composers. But sometimes with Vinyasa or Paganini or whatever, you're like, I want to play like this particular violinist. I wonder who are some of your influences, and particularly in that really showy repertoire.
I mean, Wieniawski himself obviously was a very accomplished violinist, but some things that he writes, they're very specific to him, and so I agree with your statement that when you're playing showpieces, you are playing that person, you are playing that specific violinist. Um, I've always loved Wieniawski, actually. I mean, I haven't played that many pieces of his, but I've always loved his style. Paganini, I know I'm probably going to get hate for this, but I always thought his compositional style was a little bit less cerebral
Mm.
than the
That's
other
fair.
showpiece writers. Yes, and so the caprices are really the only pieces of his that I play. The concertos, I mean, I've studied them obviously, but I don't think I'd consider performing them anytime soon. Um, so yeah, I'd say Wieniawski and probably some of the later composers like Waxman's Carmen Fantasy was one of my favorite pieces to play. Um, Not really so much the other ones, the other Carmens. Funnily enough, I've never played Sarasate's Carmen, the original one, but I'd say Waxman, Wieniawski, Vuitton sometimes.
I mean, they're great pieces and as fiddle players. I think you're right about Paganini as well, because sometimes I think it's an endurance test for the audience as much as it is for
It is
the
for the
performer
performer.
as well. So you've talked a little bit about your own evolution as a maybe more technically minded fiddle player to somebody who's has a broader and more expressive palette. What advice would you give to younger musicians that are thinking about their own progression?
Well, I would say use everything that you can find to your advantage, even your flaws. Now, that may sound counterintuitive at first, but when I was starting out, I was certainly one of the worst fiddle players that I knew. I actually started out with piano when I was 6, and I was competing internationally at some point. Violin wasn't really a goal in my life until I met my professors in college. They really helped me overcome immense amounts of tension, just insufferable amounts of tension in both of my arms. My posture was, quite frankly, terrible, and those took at least 2 to 3 years to slowly chip off those bad habits. I had to chip them off one by one, and I not only did that through the help of my professors, I also searched online. Like it may sound a little bit cheap to say, "Oh, I just learned it online," because we tend to frown upon people who say they're self-taught but instead download the Simply Piano app. But what I did was I went online and I searched for any pedagogical videos that I thought could be of use. Like, for example, Daniel Kurganov's videos, I think, were largely influential in helping me realize not only how to practice sometimes if I was ever lost on what kind of steps that I should take regarding a few passages, or simply how I would organize my movements, and also Professor Julia Bushkova's videos too. Those also really helped me, really helped me through some difficult times regarding pieces that I wasn't really accustomed to at the time. And you never know what you will learn. Sometimes you dismiss a video because you think, oh, I already know how to do this, or I've learned I am going to learn this with my professor, so why not hear what he says or she says before I watch this video? Or maybe you just don't really trust online pedagogy at all. But to those young violinists out there, I say this: if you're ever doubtful in yourself, it's okay. It's okay to be doubtful because you're not expected to know everything. The A person is stupid not because they don't know things, but because they refuse to. So use any resources you can. Don't underestimate the educational power of any piece of media that you come across.
That's some pretty wise words, Logan. So you talked a little bit about some of the disadvantages of maybe getting a little bit later start on the violin in a serious way. What were some of the advantages, though, of being an accomplished pianist that then takes up the violin?
There are actually a lot. In Bach, I think it really helps to think pianistically. Having been an accomplished keyboard player, um, it really helps to imagine the movements, or rather the intervals,
Mm-hmm.
because on a piano you can clearly see what distance a fourth is, or a fifth, or an octave, and admittedly, on a string instrument, an octave in a low position wouldn't physically be the same in a high position, but generally, I can still visualize in my mind, in my left hand, in a topological sense, I can formulate a map of how this translates to
Mm-hmm.
this. I can sort of see the intervals in my mind, and in passages in solo Bach, for example, when the left hand needs to be active, like let's say the allegro in the second sa da 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 dee da dee da da dee da da dee da da dee, I can imagine playing that with either hand on the keyboard, and that sort of natural separation that I might employ if I were to actually play this on the keyboard, I would translate that to the right hand. And I've had experience playing the harpsichord as well. That is also really helpful in deciding some stylistic or artistic interpretations when I'm playing solo Bach. But it just doesn't end there. Um, on a piano, as I said, you can clearly see the notes in front of you. You don't have to worry about pitch, and if it's out of tune, it's not your fault. The benefit of that to me is that I can sort of see the intervals on the violin, but also in a way it's more of an improvement on what I can do on the piano because once you depress a key, you can't really play a crescendo because the note will continue to taper. But on the violin, I can try to engineer what I would want a singing legato line to sound like if I were to play on the piano, because we all say that true legato is impossible on the piano unless you play a constant decrescendo or something like that. But on the violin, I can finally take steps to try to engineer what that would sound like, and having that extra dimension of sound possibilities, I think, was really interesting for me to explore.
What a great answer. So when I was about your age, I was maniacally focused on winning a full-time orchestra job, like very single-minded. But you have got this really broad set of skills, violinist, pianist, composer, science, health background, based on so far maybe a great educator. How do you see your career taking shape over the next decade or so?
I used to think that I would go into I used to think that I would go into cross field research between neuroscience and music, the two things that I was studying during my bachelor's degree. But later, I found myself to be very disinterested in science because at the end, what I was actually in one of the honors programs for neuroscience, and while it is an accomplishment that I'm proud of, it's not something that I would go through again.
Mhm.
Most of my classmates were far, far, far more talented than I was, and I felt like the straggler every time I showed up to class. They had been through labs, internships, they were doing their own research much better, much more efficiently than I was. And I just felt like I could never keep up because half of it was just brute memorization.
Mhm.
I could do that, but it's just boring and very unfulfilling to me. So during my master's, I ultimately gave up that part of my career interests. I left the lab that I was interning at and decided to focus on music. At first, I wanted to just be a performer, but then I realized just being a solo performer is a career dream that's reserved for the top 1% of the pyramid. So I decided to be a little bit more realistic and explore a few more options, which is also why I kind of chose composition as one of my sub majors. Um, but in the future, I also wish to perform still, but I also want to help people like me who didn't really have faith in themselves. Like they knew they probably had the potential to get somewhere,
Mhm.
but just didn't see it just doesn't see it just doesn't see it happening in the moment whatsoever because either they don't have the right teachers or they don't have enough confidence in themselves, a variety of reasons. And I believe that if I can get to where I am right now, it's definitely possible for other people like me to surpass me in terms of accomplishment. And I want to help them get there because it's such a satisfying feeling when you overcome personal barriers, be they on the violin or in life. And it's a goal of mine right now to be able to teach people uh, who need that sort of that sort of guidance in their life. And I can't say that I am qualified enough right now,
Mhm.
but hopefully in the next few years when I begin to learn more and gain more experience, hopefully I can become that person for them, like my professors were for me.
Logan, what an insightful viewpoint. You know, I when I was still in the orchestra business, I would, we had a lot of, new young players would come in, they would win an audition, they've been working years and years to get to that point, and often come in, I won't say underprepared, but a little underprepared for the job itself, right? And some of that is just the reality, I think, of going to music school. That there's not enough time in those 4 years, or more likely the 6 years that you're in through your master's program, to do anything other than like get your technique together and try and get your repertoire really dialed in. There's not time to learn about the other things. So what I'm wondering from you, as you look at people, maybe in using yourself as an example, this latent potential that you described, I think I have this raw ability that I could probably do something. And then there's creating the bridge to realizing that potential. What do you think is perhaps missing in the way we go about music education where that bridge isn't always fulfilled? Like, what do you have any insights into what we might do better as an educator in training the next generation of musicians to help them bridge their latent potential with their realized potential?
That is what I'm figuring out right now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a clear answer for that. I will be completely transparent here. I don't have an answer for that because myself, when I didn't really consider playing violin seriously until I was in college, but I did start learning how to play when I was about 7 or 8. Um, I didn't start with any of the basic materials like Suzuki or Masa's etudes, Don't etudes, any of that. I don't know if it was because I never bothered to play them or it was because my teachers didn't give them to me. Whatever the reason, I never went through that process, so I can't really speak with personal experience what those things would yield to someone who actually devoted time to build their technique from the ground up.
Mm-hmm.
Part of my lack of experience in that department is why I really struggled throughout college because I couldn't even keep a straight bow, and
Mm-hmm.
that probably would have been easily resolved had I actually spent a few minutes a day
Mm-hmm.
actually doing open strings and preparatory exercises. And are those etudes necessarily the key to bridging that gap? No, of course not. But it's a start, I feel like, that's why we've been using them for literal hundreds of years. That's why they've stuck around. They obviously see some use in the modern pedagogical scene, but nowadays, with the advancement of technology, of course, everybody says this that Zoom lessons have become more ubiquitous now. The access of remote learning and educational videos on YouTube or other streaming platforms, those obviously provide the tools to which people that probably would not have had access to them in the past would be able to learn from them now. Um, but it's still a mystery to me exactly how we can form a concrete plan because I did not take any I did not learn anything about music education. I would like to. I would try to, but unfortunately there's only so much you can do with your time. Um, when you are a double major in college struggling with your thesis, I never really I never really caught up with that after doing my master's. So unfortunately, I'm a little bit in the dark as to what people are doing in terms of an educational standpoint. But I would be really invested into looking into it.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're searching, and that's the most important thing because, the constant cycle of innovation in classical music and the fine arts, I think in particular, it can become very insular and stagnant, and introducing new ideas and this very broad set of skills and spectrum of ideas you're bringing to music is really exciting, Logan. So I think it's a great place to wrap up. I'd like to thank you again, Logan, for making time and for your congratulations on being the laureate for the 2024 Senior Artist Division. And like and subscribe to CVC to learn more about Logan and the other amazing violinists who competed in 2024. Thanks for tuning in, and more to come.